Welcome to this week's UEN Capital Update video. I'm Margaret Buckton, your UEN Legislative Analyst. Our primary topic for this week, we're going to talk about the Governor's School Choice Bill that was amended and approved in the Senate. But first, let's start with the in-person learning option for parents that went to the Governor. Senate File 160 was approved on party lines in both chambers yesterday. It was amended with a couple of things that we support and appreciate the changes. But let's go through the bill. It starts out with a notwithstanding any provision to the contrary. And that sets aside other laws that might get in the way of implementing this or changing interpretations. And a good example of that is Chapter 279.10 requires a public hearing to change your calendar, but this requirement supersedes that requirement, and you have to make the change in compliance with the timing. Now, the amendment did address the timing, and it says now beginning no later than the first Monday that's at least 2 weeks following signature by the Governor or enactment of the bill. The Governor has issued a press release that she's going to sign the bill today, Friday at 11 o'clock. That makes that date for implementation February 15th. That'll be the second Monday after signing the bill. Third, what are you required to do? To provide an opportunity for parents to select a full-time in-person instruction. Full-time in the Iowa Code, that's Iowa Code Chapter 279, is 180 days or 1,080 hours. There's nothing in this bill that says 5 days a week of instruction is required. So there may be some flexibility in determining how you meet the hours requirement if you're on an hours calendar. There's an exception if the Governor waives the requirement in a public health emergency proclamation. And if you're already in that full-time in-person option, you don't have to do anything. If you don't have a full-time in-person option now, the bill requires notice of an opportunity to select a full-time in-person option to parents with at least 5 days for them to reply. And it doesn't say business days. If you could get that announcement out Friday or Saturday, it might give you a little more turnaround time. And that's if you're going to continue to offer something other than just full-time. So if you're going to have some 100% virtual or some hybrid option or a combination of the three, then you have to give parents the opportunity to weigh in. There's a second notwithstanding clause in the bill. It says you only meet the days and hours requirements for accreditation if you are in compliance with this law, so it supersedes Senate File 2310 from last June. Last June's law defined primarily in person to mean 50% of your time in person. So this now would replace that. Now it says full-time. It goes back to the 180 days or 1,080 hours. Lastly, you can still request a move to 100% virtual or presumably even in a hybrid option for a COVID outbreak. The DE is directed to also consider the number of teachers in quarantine and scarcity of substitutes, food service, and bus drivers. So there are additional factors there for the department to consider. Well, the Governor sent out her press release that she's going to sign that bill in person at the Capitol at 11 o'clock on Friday, so that one is behind us, and that lets us focus on Senate File 159, the Governor's School Choice Bill. Just in terms of legislative lingo, if you ever see a pink bill in the system, that pink copy means the bill's been passed by one chamber and is now ready to be considered by the other. The last bill we looked at, the enacted copy, means it's been agreed to by both. Well, there are three major provisions in this bill that we still are strongly opposed to. First, Senate File 159 vouchers. The vouchers that are known as educational scholarships for resident incoming kindergarten students or students who have attended a school designated as in need of comprehensive improvement and support. So those are the schools on the ESSA list. The parent would apply by January 31st for an education savings account to attend private school. The enactment of that provision is not until January 31st of 2022. This is only the ESSA list, not the Iowa School Performance Profiles or our Iowa School Report Card list. So there's been some confusion as to what list a school might be on. There are 34 schools on that list right now, of which 17 are urban, 17 are rural. Some of them have approved their status in the rankings, so will likely come off next year, which means other schools will be on the list, and you might have one of them. Nearly all of the schools on the list have high poverty, high English language learner concentrations, high percentage of students with disabilities, or some combination of the three. A good example is King Elementary School in Des Moines Public Schools. They're 97% free and reduced price lunch. They're 37% English language learner and 11% IEP students. It explicitly states that private schools do not have to change their admission practices or any other provisions in accepting the voucher students, and it requires parents to pay back the voucher if the student is expelled or withdraws from the private school. If you consider the incoming kindergartners, and they're coming out of schools that have, 10 to 30% ELL or a large percentage of students with IEPs, it's possible they might not have their services able to be provided by the private school. The private school then tells the student to withdraw, and then the parent has to pay back the voucher, and it could be, 9 months of tuition. The second big picture part of this bill that we don't like is the diversity plans. It eliminates the control of 5 districts with voluntary diversity plans, including the 3 urban districts of Davenport, Des Moines, and Waterloo, so you can't control open enrollment out. It mentioned that several of those districts had failing schools on the list. I'll get to that in a minute. It does not require the suburbs to take the students. It does expand the district of residence obligation to provide transportation assistance to students with families under 200% of the federal poverty level. And that is deducted from the open enrollment tuition that goes to the neighboring school. That provision applies to all open enrollment out, not just the 5 diversity plan districts. We really need to change the conversation about this. The rhetoric in the Senate about how urban schools are failing students was absolutely awful. We need to change that mindset. How are we successful at educating students of poverty and English language learners? When we think of those students moving into our school districts in the 3rd grade or the 4th grade, how long does it take us to get to a level of proficiency that's recognized by the ESSA standard as being successful? What do we need from the state? Things like English language learner weighting, a poverty factor in the formula, high-need schools grants of $10 million that were in Governor Branstad's reform package back in 2013 that have never been funded would be a really good start. About charter schools, it adds a new model, a charter that is chartered by an independent entity and approved by the State Board of Education. There are very detailed provisions, but the big picture of the way this works is they're called public charter schools. The resident district counts the student. The money follows the student to the charter. If the charter is either new or revoked, your district can ask the School Budget Review Committee for spending authority, which means property taxes. In the first year of the charter, students may be counted twice, increasing the cost of state aid and property taxes, both counted in your district of enrollment and in the charter school. For urban schools, the difficulty of closing an attendance center will be magnified if parents or others can work with a charter company to recharter the school as an attendance center. It will be even harder to balance budgets with this kind of additional political pressure. There's one provision we haven't talked very much about because we've been really focusing on those other things that we see as more egregious, but I want to put this on your radar. There's a new data system that the DE is required to establish, an electronic data and information system. It sounds like a student information system. We're not sure if this effectively replaces Infinite Campus or whatever system you may be using, but the district has to pay a fee of $7 per student in the first year and then a fee not to exceed actual costs later. It's required to be compatible with post-secondary, but not required to be compatible with preschool through grade 12 student information systems. So this really gives us pause in terms of losing the authority to decide what's best to organize our schools, that so many of those systems deal with things much broader than just communicating to the DE about students. They're how we organize schedules and communicate with parents and track learning for students. Well, if there is any good news this week, we heard it this morning. House leadership has said that they will take more time with the governor's school choice bill. We're hearing there's great resistance to the voucher provision, if not others. And then coming up next week or soon, the school funding deadline is February 12th. That'll be 30 days after the release of the governor's budget. They're supposed to decide the state supplementary assistance rate or the state cost per pupil within that deadline. So start watching for bills to be introduced regarding school funding and keep tabs on any calls to action when they appear. See your weekly report for additional details. So your advocacy action task list this week, after you've reviewed that report, contact House members specifically about school choice. Keep talking about SSA and preschool funding. If they spend the usual amount of about $100 million, they can set the SSA rate at 4%, and then they need another $14 million or so for a preschool hold harmless, since we lost over 4,000 preschool students, and they're not protected by either on-time funding or budget guarantee. UEN resources to help. Check out the website. You'll see the call to action that was updated and sent out last night about that. Don't forget to keep us informed of contacts and relationships you have with your legislators. And thank you to your UEN corporate sponsors for their support of UEN programs and services. Most of all, thank you for your advocacy efforts on behalf of the students in your school. We'll see you next week.